Welcome to House of Destiny Analysis. Today, before we go into this powerful teaching from my dad, Kim Clement, we need to begin with what is unfolding right now in the Middle East. The war with Iran continues to create instability across the region, and the situation remains incredibly fragile. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most important pressure points in the world. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this week that the waterway has to be open one way or the other as negotiations with Iran continue. At the same time, Israel is still facing pressure from Iranian-backed Hezbollah. Reports say fighting has intensified in southern Lebanon, with Israel expanding operations and Hezbollah continuing rocket and drone attacks. So today, the question is not simply what is happening in the news. The deeper question is this: how do we hear God in the middle of shaking? How do we stay positioned when the nations are unstable? How do we walk with God when fear, war, and confusion are filling the atmosphere? And how do we become a voice in a Babylonian culture without being swallowed by fear, anger, or despair? That is why this teaching from my dad is so timely. Because he does not begin by telling people to panic. He begins by telling them to recognize the voice of God. He teaches that destiny is not discovered through fear. Destiny is discovered through alignment. I believe this word is going to help us understand not only what is happening around us, but what God may be forming inside of us. Christy, as we look at Iran, Israel, and the shaking in the nations, this teaching feels incredibly timely.
It really does. And as we look at the headlines, there are three things that we need to pay attention to. First, that the conflict with Iran is not isolated. It affects the entire region. The Strait of Hormuz is a major global pressure point because of its importance to shipping, oil, and global stability. Secondly, Israel continues to face threats not only from Iran directly, but from Iranian-backed groups around its borders. Hezbollah's rocket and drone attacks are part of a much wider spiritual and geopolitical conflict. And third, even while there are strikes, threats, and military pressure, there are also negotiations taking place, and that tells us that this is a delicate moment. It is a moment of war, but also a moment where decisions are being made that could shape the region for years to come. And this is where Kim's teaching becomes so important. Because when the world is unstable, believers must not become unstable. When the nations are shaking, we have to know the voice of God. Kim teaches in this message that Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice." That's not a small statement. In a time of war, confusion, media noise, global shaking, the people of God must be able to hear the voice of the shepherd. And then Kim takes it further. He talks about Daniel and Babylon. Daniel lived in a hostile culture. He lived under a foreign empire. He lived in a time of political power, spiritual pressure, and national crisis. But Daniel did not run from Babylon. He became a voice in the middle of it. So as we look at Iran, Israel, America, and the shaking of the nations, the question becomes, what is God forming in his people right now?
That is so important, Christy. And I love that you brought up Daniel, because my dad is going to get there in this teaching. But before he talks about Daniel, he starts with something even more foundational. He starts with the voice of God, because before you can understand your assignment, before you can understand your destiny, before you can understand how to stand in the middle of a Babylonian culture, you have to know the voice of the shepherd. So let's begin here. This is my dad, Kim Clement, teaching on knowing God's voice, walking with God, and being positioned at the right place, at the right time, for the right reason, in the right season.
We are going to teach today. Think about it. You're going to be taught that there's nobody quite like you. That's a fact. There is nobody quite like you. In the earth, you have a unique DNA, you have a unique print, you have a unique sound. Do you know that every person, you recognize people by the sound of their voice? Isn't it amazing? I can know Greg not when he walks in, but when he talks. I can hear Miranda when obviously when she talks. You know who the person is by the sound of their voice. Jesus said, my sheep will know me by my, please say it again, voice. That's right. So in other words, knowing the voice of God is probably the most important thing in your Christianity and your walk with God. Why? Because he said, my sheep shall know me by my face, by my eyes, by my walk, by my hands. No, because we're not seeing him literally anymore. We are knowing him by his voice. And that is why I believe in a prophetic people. You are a prophetic people, which means that you will live a prophetic lifestyle. The Bible says that Enoch walked with God. He walked with God and was not, for God took him. In other words, he literally disappeared. A lot of people have said, well, that is a type of the rapture or a catching away. And yes, it could very well be. But the fact is that he was walking with God. And you know that walk with God, that sentence is only used, that phrase is only used 2 or 3 times in the Bible. And so it's a very special thing to walk with God. What does it mean? Not smoking, not drinking? No, come on, please stop it. Walking with God is living a prophetic lifestyle in direct communication with the spirit world. That is what the definition of walking with God is. So your life is in order. It is aligned prophetically. In other words, whatever God wants for you to, why do you think Jesus taught us to pray? Where he said, your will be done. That wasn't the Lord's prayer. That was the Lord giving us our prayer to pray. In other words, you've got to know that you're at the right place at the right time for the right reason at the right season. Now, when you know that, you can make mistakes. You can sin. Not that you want to do it willfully, but you can make mistakes. You can fall. But if you're at the right place, at the right time, for the right reason, at the right season, then, my dear friend, the enemy cannot touch you. Now, you will reap what you sow if you do things wrong, and we understand that. I hope you do anyway. But so many people take their focus off where they are going, where they are walking, or how they are walking with God and in his will, when little things begin to spoil their walk. Little sins, little thoughts, little ideas, little stupid things. So I'm wanting to encourage you today that as we begin our course on destiny, which is going to take me a few weeks, I want you to realize that my sole goal is to get you at the right place, at the right time, for the right reason, at the right season. That is very important that you understand.
Wow. And you know what? It is so important for us to be hearing this kind of teaching right now, where my dad, as a prophet, is teaching on hearing the voice of God. You just heard what he said. And in the environment and the season we are in, there is sort of hyper focus on those little things, those little sins or indiscretions that you feel are pulling you away and are, but at the same time, the focus on that is actually a distraction. We are in this situation where, and Dad says, it doesn't start with the calling and or success or influence. It starts with hearing God's voice. And that's so important right now because we have so many voices speaking to us, voices of anxiety, voices of fear, these different politics and in social media and the technology and the environment, again, that we are in, those things have such a loud voice. And so we have to be able to combat that as the people of God, as a prophetic people, to be hearing his voice first. And that takes walking with God. Destiny begins when we say, God, I hear you, I trust you, I want your will.
Absolutely
right,
correct. That is the foundation where Jesus said in John 10:27, my sheep hear my voice and I know them and they follow me. So hearing God's voice is not just about comfort, it's about direction. So in a time of war, shaking, uncertainty, we can't be led only by headlines. We have to be led by the shepherd. And your dad connects that to alignment, being at the right time, at the right place at the right time for the right reason in the right season. And that leads us into this next part because Kim begins to explain that your calling can change, but your destiny is set. This clip is a little longer, but I'm encouraging you to stay and listen to it. It's life-changing.
First of all, your present circumstances are dictated by your destiny. In other words, God is forming and fashioning you at this time. Your circumstances are actually leading you to your destiny. So your call on earth can change. Let's talk about the difference between a call and an election. For those that have never heard that, what that means. Your call can change. God could call you, for instance, to a city, to go there for a season. But then that no longer continues. It's called the discontinuation of your call. That can happen. Just like in the Old Testament, there was discontinuation of certain laws that no longer were necessary. Doesn't mean they weren't good, they weren't right, but they discontinued. And there are certain laws that continued that were carried on through the cross. However, it's important that you understand that there is a discontinuation of your call because your call is temporary. So when God calls you, let's say He calls you, He called us to Dallas for a season. We were there for 15 years. We did exactly what He wanted us to do in those 15 years. But the day came when He told us it's time to move on. Your call has changed. I'm going to reposition you so that I can do different things. So there's going to be a geographic alignment that takes place. So that you must be in the right geography so that I can bless you spiritually. Believe it or not, geography has a lot to do with it. Where you are geographically can make a big difference. If you're supposed to be in Dallas and you're living in Alabama, then you're at the wrong place. You understand? And I know it's very simple, but we must also understand the geographic alignment issue, where God said, I don't want Jacob here now, I want him to be in Luz. And then He called him from Luz. He went, and of course, Jacob blessed that place, which was a mess, by the way. He blessed the mess when he got to Luz, and he called it Bethel. He said, I'm not going to name you Luz. I'm going to call you by your rightful name. And he called it Bethel, which is the house of God. Is that correct, Dubi? So he called it Bethel, and he renamed the place that God had sent him to. So once God had called him to Luz, he had received the vision, he'd received the word. God then took him to his uncle Laban, and he was there for 20 years. Once he was finished his 20-year call, he was then called back to go back. And then you know that he was called, of course, to cross the ford of the Jabbok, and he got to the other side. And when he got there, God spent time with him alone. He spent time with him alone, wrestled with him. There was a dislocation that took place in the hip of Jacob, and then his name changed, and he got to his ultimate destiny, and that's how God works with you. I can go through many, many different examples of where people are called to different places geographically so that He could align them and do what He has to do, and what He had planned for them to do. What happened to us in Dallas, now many of you don't know this, is that we didn't want to move. Now, I don't want to insult the Dallasites here, and even Texas, but I didn't like Dallas because of the heat. I'm not a heat person. I don't like humidity, and it was always so humid, and so I always had a selfish reason. But we had a house there, and everything was just going well, and I was traveling. It was a good central hub to fly out of on American Airlines, and so everything was going good until we had a situation where my son was accused of being a criminal at the age of 12, by the way. He was accused of doing something. I'm not going to go into detail about it now, but I want to show you how sometimes what we think is demonic is actually a dynamic. We didn't want to move. God said, I want you to go to California. Well, as far as we knew, California was going to fall into the sea, and we didn't particularly want to go with them. And so God said to me, I have to position you in California in order to take you to a higher level of your election. A higher level of your destiny. So your journey there's going to be progression, which I'm going to deal with in a few minutes. A progressive journey that you go on. But I was stubborn. Jane didn't want to move either. And so we had this terrible situation, was because I was out of alignment and I was supposed to be in California, but I was remaining in Texas. Everything began to get chaotic. And we have quite a chaotic life living the way we do in the spirit, but this was a different type of chaos. My son was accused of trying to blow up a school, which was not the truth, by the way. And we were all over the news. We were ABC, NBC, the whole of them, they were parked outside of our house. The police entered our home illegally. They said they found cocaine, which was not cocaine. It was actually a headache powder. And you know the headache powders that they have. And so, but they accused it. Went all over the news. And we were in the depths of despair. Had to get a lawyer. We had the news media against us. Money stopped coming in. People believed what they heard on the news and what they heard about us. And I was just in such a state. And I searched out to God and said to him, God, what must I do? Because a neighbor who really hated what I was doing, came against us. And I prayed, and God spoke to me and said, you got to move, Kim. You got to get out. We still stubbornly stayed in Texas. And we moved to another house because the neighborhood we were staying in, they thought we were a bunch of criminals. So we moved out of it and went to another neighborhood in Texas. Wrong move. We were supposed to be in California. And while we were there, things were beginning to happen that were just causing havoc in our lives. And so eventually, to cut a long story short, because of that dynamic that was taking, remember when Jonah was supposed to go to Nineveh? You know the story. He went the other way. He went to Tarshish. And what happened was on the way, there was a storm. And so because he was out geographically dislocated, it caused catastrophic events for the people in the boat, for himself, until he got back to Nineveh. So when we got to California, that's when God gave us you. And all this came together. And we were able to help so many people. So I want you to understand that your calling can change. So you are called to, for instance, David was called to look after his father's sheep. Then David was called to slay the giant. Then David was called to be an armor bearer for Saul. Then David was called to be a harpist in the house of a maniac. Do you understand? Then David was called to leave Jerusalem, and David was called to become culturally acceptable. He began to understand the different cultures and the different nations as he was in this terrible place. And so he was called to these different areas until he was called to Zion, where he was there for 7.5 years. And then he was called to Jerusalem, and then he was called to Zion, which he built up. And then ultimately, that is what he was elected to do. Now, I'm telling you all of that so you understand your election is set, but your calling changes through your life. I know that's helped a lot of people, and you need to understand that. So your call on earth can change. Your election or your destiny on this earth is set. That's what you're called to do. You were born at the right time. Everybody watching me all over the world say, I was born at the right time. Okay, so you understand you're supposed to be here in 2015. You may not like it, you may think it sucks, and you don't like what's going on all over the world, but you were born to be here at this time, to be formed and shaped, to express the unique message for God's purpose on the earth. Just to think about it, you are being shaped and formed now for something fantastic.